It's the middle of August, which means it's time to discuss what we would change if we were NHL commissioner for the NHL, and that's coming up right after this.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I am Hunter Hodies, one of the hosts of the Locked On Penguins podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies. Normally, I would be joined by Nick Zararis today, but he is in Europe for the next week, going to go see a couple of shows, hanging out over there. So pinch hitting for Nick today is Gil Martin. You guys know him very well of the Locked On Islanders podcast and for the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. So Gil, thank you so much for pinch hitting today.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure talking hockey with you, Hunter.
Of course. And remember, people, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets right now. And of course, thank you guys so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. So, Gil, this is very much the dead zone of the NHL offseason. It comes your way every year, middle of August. All the GMs, all the players, they are at their cottages, at their vacation homes, taking their last few weeks of paid time off before getting back to their NHL cities for the start of September, just because September, that's when training camp comes around. And then the end of the month into October, you have the preseason. And then right after that, you have the regular season. So they're wrapping up their off seasons, which means it's a great time to discuss what we would change if we were the NHL commissioner right now. I like a lot of the rules, I would say, in the NHL, but there is still quite a bit that I would change, Gil, and I'll start with this one. I think the NHL's decision to go to 3-on-3 was a very good decision. Before, when it was at 4-on-4, you were seeing too many shootouts, which I hate. I know you're going to get to that in just a second. Since going to 3-on-3, the number of shootouts has decreased, thankfully, just because I can't stand the skills competition either. I like 5 minutes, but I still think it's a little bit shorter. I think if they were to extend it to 7 to 8 minutes, I think that would make more sense. 10 minutes, that would be a lot of fun, but I think you would see a lot of players really gassed by the end of that. But I think if you were to add 2 to 3 more minutes, I don't think you would see hardly any shootouts in a league. Like, I know right now, Gil, the numbers of shootouts have decreased since going to 3-on-3. They would decrease even more if you go to 7 to 8 minutes, in my opinion. That's what I would do.
I agree with you. I'd advocate for the 10. I'd go all the way with the 10 minutes. And if the players get gassed, they'll make mistakes. The puck will end up in the back of the net. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to go all the way. Let's do the 10 minutes. And to sort of piggyback off of that, I'm okay with a tie. Like, if you play the 10-minute overtime and nobody scores, I would eliminate the shootout, which we alluded to before. And I'm okay with both teams getting 1 point. I'm old enough to remember when ties were a thing in the NHL. And maybe I'm in the minority here, but it didn't bother me that much. If two teams played evenly for 60 or 65 or 70 minutes, whatever it's going to be, sometimes a tie is fair.
See, I've never really could stand ties in any sport. Like, for example, like the NFL still has that, they have one overtime period. And at the end of that, Gil, if the score is still tied, the game ends in a tie. I've seen my Steelers end a game in a tie. Actually, a couple of games end in a tie. And it's just like, it's a weird result because you didn't lose, but you didn't win. So it's like, it's kind of like a weird feeling. And I guess I don't want that feeling coming back to hockey. So I'll disagree with a little bit with you there, but I also understand where you're coming from, just because ending the game in a skills competition, it feels weird. And you can tell now a lot of the players just hate the shootout. Like, the Penguins had quite a few shootouts last year. Well, I shouldn't say quite a few, but they had still a decent amount, to the point where I was annoyed after the last one that they did. And you could tell a lot of the top players, because they've been doing the same move for so long, it's like they're barely even trying it. Like, for example, Chris Letang, he does the same thing, forehand, backhand. Crosby comes in very slow, tries to fire a regular shot. Gino will do, a deke every now and then. Raquel and Rust have their little moves. But for the most part, like, the Penguins' big guns, they are so sick of the shootout. And it's like, even when they score, they hardly even like react to it. You see this for other players as well. So I think a lot of the players are also getting sick of it too.
Yeah, and look, my Islanders are terrible at shootouts. They don't have the luxury of saying, "Oh yeah, we have 3 or 4 guys who always do the same move," and they're just bad. And really, since Franz Nielsen left about 5-6 years ago, they haven't had a great shootout player. But for me with shootouts, the thing is this: I want the game determined by playing the game. Right. I don't want the glorified skills competition to determine who makes the playoffs and who doesn't. And, it's almost like there are players who are not particularly good or at goal scoring 5-on-5 or on the power play, but they're really good in shootouts. And it's like, it's just strange that you have a different set of criteria to determine that extra point in the standings. Now, the other alternative is to get rid of the loser point altogether, or go to a 3-2-1-0 kind of a format. You get 3 points for winning in regulation, 2 for winning in overtime, 1 for losing in overtime, and 0 for losing in regulation. That would be another alternative, and that would incentivize, trying to win late in the game. You're not going to see teams take their foot off the gas and say, "Hey, we got the point and we're just going to, be happy with that." They're going to try to win the game because they get that extra point. And I think it would make the end of games a little more intense.
That's also a good one. If you want even a more chaotic version, how about 3 points for regulation win, 2 points for an overtime win, no points at all if you lose, like no loser point even in overtime. Like, just because you look at the loser point right now, Gil, I always like to joke that the Islanders have become like loser point merchants these last few years just because they stack them like they're, infinity stones. And you see other teams also do this as well. And I know why the NHL does it. It creates the parity. It creates the closer races, even though some of these teams that have a lot of loser points, Gil, when you combine those losses with regular regulation losses, they're below 500 for the season. Yeah. So I get why the NHL does it, but I think the standings would be way more fascinating if you maybe just did a 3-2-0 situation where the loser, it doesn't matter if they lose in overtime or a shootout or regulation, the loser just gets no points.
I could totally go for that. The reason the league doesn't do it, like you said, it artificially keeps the standings close.
Right.
But at the same time, it makes it harder to make up those points. So if you get 0 for losing a game, instead of being 5 points back, you'll be 10 points back, but it's easier to make up those points because for me as a fan, if I'm, let's say an Islanders fan and the Penguins are playing the Rangers, the one thing I hate, if this game goes to overtime, we're doubly screwed because 2 teams in our division are gaining points. So like it's like, okay, I don't care who wins as long as it doesn't go to overtime. And that's ridiculous. That's not, as a fan, how I want to root for a game if I'm watching it.
I hear you. No, I agree with you on that. Again, I don't think the NHL is ever going to do it.
Nope.
But I would be in favor of it. It would make for some, I think, really cool results, especially at the end of games go, where I think you see teams pushing even more to try and get those points in regulation. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to continue this discussion and discuss maybe bringing in a rule where if a team has a power play to start overtime, the faceoff should be in the offensive zone. Gil and I are going to talk about that, plus a lot more right after this. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions, so whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champion before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. My pick for MVP this year, I'm going to go back to Josh Allen. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I think he's going to win it this year. Could go for Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, but I am going to go Josh Allen this year. He is an absolute freak. I'm going to pick to win the Super Bowl. I'm still not really sure yet. I'd like to go the Buffalo Bills, but they've just been cursed throughout my entire existence, Gil's existence as well. So not going to go that far just yet. But visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is 1 day and 1 day and only. That is FanDuel. Play your game. All right, we're back here on the Thursday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodies, joined today by Gil Martin, who is pinching in for Nick Zararis, who is out in Europe partying it up for the next week. So, Gil, I teased it going into the second segment, but how about this for a potential rule change? You know how a game is tied at the end of the third period, a team gets a power play with, say, 15 seconds left. The other team takes a power play. You only have 15 seconds to score, otherwise the game goes to overtime. So you would have a minute 45 of a 4-on-3 to start overtime. Let's have the face-off to start overtime in the offensive zone. You have the power play. The other team took the penalty. Why should the face-off be at center ice? Put it in the offensive zone. Does it screw over the team that took the penalty? Yeah, but again, that team took the penalty. So I think that would make for some really chaotic fun.
I think it would too, and it also gives a high disincentive to take a penalty late in the game, because if you're coming in 4-on-3 in overtime and the face-off is in the defensive zone, you're really hurting your team even more than if the face-off was at center ice. And, you know, what if there's only 15 or 20 seconds left in a power play? That makes, again, an even bigger difference and a bigger impact. So I would favor a rule change like that.
I agree with you. It's funny. My co-host Patrick Damp and I, we were talking about some other rule changes on Locked On Penguins last week, and he was like, we should kind of get rid of offsides and overtime or something like that. And I'm like, I don't know if I would go that far, just because you'd see so much cherry picking, and I don't want to see another Danny Briere situation, which happened against the Penguins in 2012 when he was literally 15,000 feet offside, which got the Flyers back into the game in game 1. I know it's been 13 years, but that play still lives rent-free in my head. I wouldn't go that far, but keeping it with overtime, this will be fully chaotic. I don't think the NHL would ever do this, but I would at least consider it. Bringing playoff overtime rules to the regular season would be so fun and also so chaotic. Again, I love 3-on-3. It's amazing. We've talked about potentially going to 7 to 8 minutes, but if that were to not work out and the players were to go against that, if I were the commissioner, I'd be like, okay, what about playoff OT in the regular season, 5-on-5 play till you win? Would games potentially go to, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on work and school nights? Absolutely. But as a night owl, I would be very much in fan of that. Though again, the NHL would never do it right now, but it would still be so much fun. I love playoff OT. It would be so cool to see it during the regular season. But I also get what people would push back in the comments, probably saying like the games would end too late. The players are going to be gassed by the end of that game. There could be a back-to-back the next night, for example. So I would get it, but man, it would be fun.
It would be fun. But yeah, you talked about the back-to-backs, especially now in an Olympic year, plus which, it would be tough for fans. Hey, you and I would have to record podcasts very late at night if the
3
game
a.m.
was doing. Yeah, exactly. So let's not rush into that one, even though I like it in theory. In practice, there are obviously some issues. But yeah, I mean, a long overtime, those games are memorable. Those games are very, and I think Major League Baseball made a mistake when they changed their extra inning rules, because you don't see those 18, 19 inning games. And they weren't 2 or 3 a year you used to have, but they were fun. They were memorable. So I would favor it, but I know it's just not plausible in the modern game. One thing I definitely would change, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, I want to see diving or embellishment penalties called when there's no penalty on the other team. I don't understand if a player was actually tripped and they embellish, and for those of you listening, I just put that in air quotes. So they cancel out the power play. Each team gets a minor penalty. Okay, whatever. But when a player embellishes and he wasn't tripped or hooked or whatever, and he takes a dive to try to draw the penalty, I want a team to be shorthanded as a result of that, because that's really much more unsportsmanlike than embellishing an actual trip.
I do like that. I agree with you. And you saw something weird going on during the playoffs where a team would commit an infraction. It was a legit penalty. But then the NHL ref would also penalize the player that got taken down, whether he was, tripped, hooked, any of the calls, boarded, for example. And they would penalize that player, Gil, for diving when there was no dive there. So right. I think they also need to get that in check as well. You can't call embellishment on a player who do not embellish, getting tripped or boarded or hooked or any of those other penalties. Like I kept seeing that constantly during the playoffs, and it's like, that wasn't a dive. If you want to call diving, I am all for it. I hate it. I hate embellishment, but you can't just call it for the sake of it. Like, it just looks like they're trying to even it up for the sake of evening it up. And that's also something I would change. I hate that when it comes to NHL officials, when they try to just even out the penalties. For example, a team will commit 3 penalties in the first period, Gil, but by the end of the game, the penalties are 3-3 because they're not going to call another penalty on that team, but they'll call a penalty on you the first time you do something. I hate that way of refereeing. If you commit a penalty, call it. If a team commit 6 penalties to the other team's 1, it just means the other team was more disciplined during the game. Yep. I just hate the way that the refs go about evening up games as it goes on, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, and by trying not to decide a game, they are deciding a game.
Right.
I mean, you could say what you want, and I'll take it a step further. What's a penalty in the first period should be a penalty in the third period, yes, or in overtime, or in double overtime if it's a playoff game. There should be one standard, and if it's a trip in 2 minutes into the game, it should be a trip 58 minutes into the game.
Right, 100%. And I get it when people will say, let these guys play. I 100% understand that. You want the players to decide the game, and you don't want to call ticky-tacky calls. I very much get it. But as you said, if it's a legit infraction in the first period and happens in the third, even though it's close and it's a legit penalty, you still have to call it. But that's the thing, Gil. They just don't, because especially that's how playoff officiating goes at this point. Do you have anything else that you would change if you were commissioner before we get to the final segment, which is also going to be pretty fun?
Now, you know what? The only other thing that I would do, I would try to change the playoff formula.
Yes.
I'd go back to 1 through 8 in the conference. And I would probably also try to play more games in the division during the regular season, and maybe just go to 1 home and 1 road game against every team outside of your division, even the teams in your own conference.
That's a good one too. You know that they are extending the season to 84 games just to get that extra divisional game for the teams that you will play 3 times in your division, Gil. So you'll play a lot of teams right now 4 times, but there's a few teams every year in your division that you're only playing 3 times. So they're adding the 84 games so you can play every team in your division 4 times. I agree with you about the playoff format. I just don't think it rewards the regular season well enough. Like, for example, we just saw Dallas, Colorado in the first round. That is not a first round playoff series. It is ridiculous that one of those teams should be out in the first round. Back in 2016, 2017, when the Penguins were playing the Capitals, second round playoff series, that should have been an Eastern Conference final. And don't get me wrong, the Penguins played 2 great conference finals against the Lightning and the Senators those seasons, but still would have been crazy if we saw Penguins Capitals in the conference final. You saw Penguins Blue Jackets in the first round in 2017. Those were 2 of the top 7 teams in the league at the end of the regular season. Again, we can keep going down the list, Gil. We see Oilers Kings round 5,000 basically every year. It's just like, give me more variety in the matchups. I don't want to see the same teams play each other year after year after year. And one more thing, let's start the season a little bit earlier and not have the season go into late June at this rate. I get it, just because ESPN has the rights. You'd be going up against the NFL, college football. But sooner or later, we might be going into early July when it comes to the season. And I don't want to don't get me wrong. I like July. The summer's awesome. I don't need to see hockey going into early July. Hockey should be over by the first week of June, maybe the second week. We should not be having Stanley Cup final games, June 20th, June 21st, or anything like that. So I think the season, it's too long right now. So I would look to shorten it a little bit, but that's also just me.
No, I agree with you on that, starting a little earlier. Would you favor, and I'm old enough to remember this happening in the early 80s, just going 1 through 16 in the playoffs? Forget the conferences. Best team, worst team in the playoffs, and so on. That would give you the variety.
It would be fun, though. I think potential travel issues would really accompany that. So, say, for example, look at the Stanley Cup final here. Say Edmonton gets the number 1 seed. I'm just throwing it out there. And the 16 seed doesn't matter. The conference is, again, one of the Florida teams, or, say Carolina, or say another team on the East Coast. That travel back and forth would just be nuts. You want an even more chaotic version? How about let's let the top seeds pick who they play in the playoffs? And then if that lower seed beats that top team, that lower seed is just going to keep talking a bunch of garbage for years to come. Would be also a lot of variety in the playoffs. They'll never do that, though. But
and you could do like a TV show where they select the opponents. It would be wild. I would love it. They may never do it, but I would love it.
I would love it too. They probably will never do that, but it's still a fun idea to think about. But that'll do it for the second segment. Coming up to end the show, the Locked On NHL channel, we're going to be dropping our top 100 players in the NHL coming up pretty soon. And Gil and I are going to do a quick preview of some of the teams that may have some of the most players on that list. And that's coming up right after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot when you need to hire like yesterday. The pressure is on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed Sponsored Jobs comes in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need.
All right, we're back here on today's edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. I'm Hunter Hodies, joined by Gil Martin, who is filling in for Nick Zararis. And Gil, this is quite a fun project that the entire channel is doing, naming the top 100 players in the NHL right now. You, for the Locked On Islanders show, you had to submit your top 3 players in the Islanders that could potentially be on this list. Every host for every team had to submit a list of around 3 to 5 players, or their top 3 to 5 players on their team that could be on this list so that we could all vote on it. For me, Gil, Pat and I, we came up with around 3 to 5: Sidney Crosby, Erik Karlsson, Brian Rust, Rickard Rakell, Evgeny Malkin. Not all 5 of them are going to be on the list, but we expect at least a few of them. If Sidney Crosby is not in the top 10, I think I'm going to riot, by the way. I think one of Erik Karlsson, Rickard Rakell, or Brian Rust will probably be on there as well. And then, Gil, which players did you put on your list?
From the Islanders, I had Ilya Sorokin, I had Bo Horvat, and I had Matthew Barzal. So those were my 3.
Yeah, and that makes sense. In my opinion, those are by far the 3 best players on the Islanders. But, Gil, let's take a small preview here. Which teams may have the most players on this top 100? And to me, right away, the 2 that really stuck out, Tampa Bay and Florida. I mean, the Panthers, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, Sasha Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, Sergei Bobrovsky, Sam Reinhart, potentially Sam Bennett, Gustav Forsling. We can keep going down the list, but there's a good chance that most, if not all of those players could be on there. For Tampa Bay, Andrei Vasilevsky, Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, Victor Hedman. Again, we can keep going down the list there as well. Those 2 really stuck out to me.
How about Colorado? I think they've got a lot of guys who are probably going to be on this list as well.
Yeah, Colorado, that's a good one. Obviously, McKinnon, we all know he's going to be on there, Cale Makar. Like those are the two very obvious ones, but I also would say Dallas, that's going to be a really good one. Mikko Rantanen, Jason Robertson, I think will probably be on there. Miro Heiskanen, Jake Ottinger, potentially Rupe Hintz. I could even see people arguing for Thomas Harley. I think he's one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. So the Stars will also have quite a bit on there as well. And some people aren't talking about this team as much, in my opinion, but I could see Washington having quite a few on there. Obviously, Ovechkin's going to be on there, but Dylan Strome, there's a chance. Tom Wilson, Jacob Chikrin just had a really good year. I could see him being on there as well. And even, New Jersey as well. You have Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jacob Markstrom, Dougie Hamilton, Jesper Bratt. They have a lot of players that I could see on there as well. So again, those are the teams that really stand out to me. Edmonton, we were talking about
for sure.
Right.
But here's my question to you. Having more players on this list, a lot of those teams end up being top heavy. And they end up having to fill in their rosters with guys on entry-level contracts or guys who are making the league minimum. Which one is the better path to success? Top-heavy with star players, but then, having a lack of depth? Or maybe fewer star players, but better players up and down your lineup?
See, that's a good question. And, Nick and I actually did a really cool roster building exercise last week where I tried to see if I could, you take one player from each team, no repeats, and you have to fill it 95 million under the cap. And I tried to make a team with Makar and McDavid as my two big stars, and I was able to do it. So you can have some of the stars like that, but then I was able to fill out my depth, especially my bottom six, with cheap, really good depth scorers. And then my second line also had some really good players that were making a decent amount of money. And then defensively, I was able to stack up some really good defensemen on there. Like you only could use one ELC. So I did Lane Hudson down there. But I put, Thomas Harley, I put Gustav Forsling, I had Cale Makar there. I had a couple other cheaper options on the right side. So I think you need the stars no matter what. Like if you don't have star power in the NHL, I don't think you are going to win a Stanley Cup. That's just not going to happen. But as long as you have at least a couple, Gil, whether it's a franchise center and a franchise defenseman or, two franchise centers and maybe a really good number one defenseman, I think if you surround those players with the adequate depth and the right players, you will have a better chance of succeeding against a team that's a bit more top heavy, not as good of depth in the bottom six. So I'm glad that you asked that because it was a really cool exercise that Nick and I did last week. What do you say though?
I think you need that depth because in the exercise, you can pick and choose your bottom six players, but in the league, you got 31 other GMs competing for those players. So it's a little tougher to get that kind of depth after you've established those superstars at the top. Let me ask you this, though, Hunter. Is there a player who you feel won't be on this list that you just feel deserves to be?
Ooh, that is a really, really good question. So it's funny, Nick and I, we kind of put together a little bit of a spreadsheet with some of the players, a lot of the players actually that could be on this list. And, I go back and forth on some of these, but, I actually kind of wonder if Josh Morrissey won't make this list from the Winnipeg Jets. I think he has a really good case for it because I think he's one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. I don't think he gets talked about enough when you look at the upper echelon of defensemen in the league. And, Winnipeg, I think Kyle Connor is going to be on this list, Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele. I think those three will definitely be on there. But I'm a bit worried that someone like Josh Morrissey may not get on the list, even though I think he very well should be.
I think that's spot on. I would have to agree with that. And, I guess in Winnipeg, they're not getting as much attention from the national media.
Well, they don't have the airport, so we can make that joke again on this show. But hey, Winnipeg is still going to be good this year. TBD on if they'll be, the top team in the West, but I still think they're going to be a playoff team this year. In terms of maybe some teams that may not have as many players. I look at a team like, for example, Chicago, we all know Connor Bedard is going to be there, but how many other players after? Still to be determined. Philadelphia, I like Konechny, I like Michkov, but I'm still not sure who after that is going to be in the NHL's top 100 when you just look at the amount of talent on some of these other top teams around the league. So those are just a couple that have really come out to me as maybe saying like there's going to be a player or two or maybe even three from those teams, but it might be, pale in comparison to some of these other teams that may have like 6 or 7 guys on there.
Yeah, I might add Seattle to that list.
Good one.
1 or 2 players, but probably no more. And if you think about it, with 32 teams, each team, in theory, all things being equal, should have 3 players on that list.
Right. And I think Anaheim, I think should have at least a few, Mason McTavish, Leo Carlson, I think should probably be there as well. If you want to make an argument for Frank Vetrano, maybe, but I would say McTavish and Carlson, for sure. If someone wants to make an argument for Lucas Dostal, considering how good he already is as a goalie, maybe, but I would say at least 2, maybe 3 for the Ducks, but we'll just have to see how it all shakes out. But Gil, unless you have anything else to add for this final segment, I think that'll do it for today's edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. And we'll be back with another episode for the Locked On NHL podcast on Friday, but I'll see you guys again on this show next Thursday.